Cool. Okay, recording, and I'm going to admit everyone now. Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for your patience in the waiting room. Just let the last couple of people come in. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I currently am, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm so pleased to be here with you this evening for this discussion of Aaron Smith's The Rock with Aaron, Fraser Nye and Stefan Armbruster. So before I hand you over to tonight's speakers, I'd just like to really quickly reiterate some of the info that you were sent in the email with the link for you to join tonight. So you have all automatically been placed on mute as you've noticed. However, that doesn't mean that tonight's speakers don't want to answer your questions. They certainly do. You can send those through to me using the chat box. If you can't see it, then it should be towards the lower left of your screen. And if you still can't find it, then don't worry too much. I'm going to be using it to send you the link that you can use to purchase your copies of The Rock from us at Avid Reader. When I do that, it's going to pop up on your screen. So type your questions in there. They'll come straight through to me and I'll read them out for our speakers later on in the evening. So yeah, start sending those through to me as soon as possible. It's now my pleasure to introduce Aaron Smith. Aaron is a freelance journalist as well as a media and communications consultant. His stories have appeared on SBS, ABC Radio, CNN, The Guardian, Australian Geographic and Koori Mail to name a few. Aaron grew up in Tasmania, grew street smart in Melbourne, then grew older in various locations around the planet. From 2013 until 2019, he was the editor of the Torres News. The position garnered him 2 Queensland Clarion Journalism Awards and 4 finalist nominations. Prior to journalism, Aaron was a playwright, filmmaker, actor, grunge rocker, sound engineer, barman, dish pig, truck driver, and many other things he chooses not to remember. His previous books are Shanty Bloody Shanty, An Indian Odyssey, and Chasing El Dorado, A South American Adventure. Aaron currently lives in far north Queensland with his wife, daughter, and their 3-legged dog. Fraser Nye is traditional owner of Masig Island, former councillor, and has sat on Torres and Cape Health Board and Prime Minister Advisory Council member. Stefan Armbruster is a journalist who has covered the Pacific for 25 years and is currently the Brisbane-based correspondent for SBS News, covering Queensland and the Pacific. And so, Aaron, Fraser, and Stefan, it's now my pleasure to hand over to you all for tonight's discussion.
I think they've just given us the keys to the Zoom room. Firstly, many big guests to everyone to come here tonight and listen to us yarn. And I too would like to thank the traditional owners of the Kaurag Nation where I wrote this book, and the traditional owners of all of the countries and nations that I've worked and played and explored over the last half century and learned from. And I think actually, if I could put you on a spot here, Fraser, if you could just give us a bit of a traditional island way of starting anything from any sort of function, maybe give a bit of a blessing, because that's something that we normally do in anything of when people meet island style. Would you give us a bit of a lesson?
We'll say, Aaron, thanks for that, and look, also acknowledgement, Aaron, for the people with traditional owners of kids, on their country, and we're on their country, and it's been such a blessing for Torres Strait Islanders from up that part. We do a lot of stuff, schooling down this part. A lot of people come and work down here, and it's been a land of opportunity for our country from Torres Strait Island down this part of the world as well. And I just want to acknowledge that part in the beginning of our conversation here this afternoon or tonight. But I guess Aaron wants me to. I'll just say what we normally do on the islands, and we always say a prayer. So open Emma, Kate, and Stefan to open our conversation and stuff like that. And if you don't mind, I'll just say a prayer for us. I'll just pray. Father God, big yes for this time, Lord. Thank you for everything that you blessed us with, everything that we have, our gifts, our talents, and Lord, we just thank you that you provide in all that we have to produce and to contribute to the world. Lord, we just pray that you bless our conversation here tonight and bless all that here, and Lord, this work by Aaron, what Aaron's written down, that it will share and bless the hearts of many to open their eyes and see a different perspective about the world and be more understanding and empathetic and to actually walk those things. Lord, we just pray this, Father God, in Jesus' name. Amen. That's all.
Bella Fraser. Now, firstly, just before we start, I have to. There's a little footnote that I have to add that Fraser just brought to my attention, and in great tradition to the Torres News, where every week I would spell at least one person's name wrong. I actually spelled Bella Fraser's name wrong in the book. I can't believe it, but it wasn't intentional. But I think that will just go down in history as every week I'd be going, oh, good story, Bella, but you spelled my name wrong. I'm like, oh man, next week I have to do an apology. So you're gonna have to wait until the next book until I can print the apology for the name wrong for that one. So
no, it's good because I can always say, no, it was my cousin Fraser, not me. So it was the other guy.
Anyway, so look, I guess this book, it's my version of it's my take on the great Australian anti-novel. Although it's not a novel, it's trying to reveal the ugly truth of the lie that is Australia, but without casting the first stone by writing the rock. I think it's important that that while I give it to everyone, I give it to myself as well. And one of the main things that this book I'm hoping will do is sort of make everyone realise what we don't know, because certainly, I arrived in TI completely culturally clueless, and I didn't even realise that English was a second language until I landed on the wharf there and walked down and heard everyone speaking Umplatalk and thinking, oh, geez, and and I'm hoping this book will sort of open people's eyes, not just to the aspirations and trials of Islander folk, but First Nations people all across the nation and what they can contribute. So, I don't know. It's like, without me rambling too much, maybe I'll just start with... I think I have to do it, boys, but I'm just going to read a quick passage, and there is a language warning on this passage. I call it my 4-word or my 4-letter word. And so I'm just going to get straight into it. Fuck you. With all due respect, fuck you. Yes, you, dear reader of this page. Fuck you, Australia. Lost in the great forgetting, the great unknowing, the great denial of your bloody heart of darkness. With all of us drowning in the modern era of narcissism, in the rising tide of bigotry and intolerance at the arse end of times. Fuck you, the 85% who live in metropolises, drip-fed in augmented reality by your smartphone and widescreen TV, swallowed up by suburbia, each quarter-acre block cut off from the vast expanse of country by a 5-foot paling fence. That's country with a capital C, which rolls across hundreds of nations in this great southern land, our ancient island home, this beautiful, desolate rock cast adrift in Oceania. I won't go on because I'll save the rest for you, but I then basically tell us all to get fucked, myself included. And I guess what I'm aiming for this is, it's a letter to the nation and it's a bit of a wake-up call. The rest of the book, it softens in its delivery, but I really want for people to think about what we haven't faced as a nation and what we have yet to address for us to move forward. I'd like to jump now to either you or Stefan, to either you, Bella, or to Stefan, to throw a spanner in my works. Stefan, I'm gonna throw the gauntlet your way, and I mean you've been a confidant and a soldier in arms over the years. We've shared a few tales and hatched a few plans. What's your take on where we're at as a nation? And what was your takeaway from the book?
What struck me about the book was a book like that hadn't been written about the Torres Strait. There's a lot of books have been written about the region that are academic, and there's a lot of historical ones that were fictionalized versions like the Idris ones that are out there, but in terms of contemporary storytelling from the region and having it as a concise, or concise, it's not really concise, is it, Aaron? It rambles all over the place. It rambles. But having such a comprehensive story about the Strait and contextualizing it, because you draw in so many different sources and different streams of thought about not just Torres Strait, but Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues in Australia, and then relate it back to the politics going on globally sometimes. It's really wonderful document, really wonderful way of reading through your journey, what you've learned in the process of discovering the Torres Strait and how complex it is. So, and what? Oh, sorry. Back to the question. What was the question? What do I think is the state of play? Did you say?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I guess writing this book, as soon as I arrived in the Torres Strait, I knew I wanted to write about it, but I didn't have a clue for the first few years what I was going to write about, and so I just started reading into the history. It was starting with Eddie Mabo's biography and then I read through the journals compiled about Torres, the original explorer, and well, not the original explorer, but the European explorer, and then not knowing what to write about, and then obviously things happening, and then researching something, I'd find out something about native title, and I'd follow this piece of string, and geez, all these other things that happened. So I guess the book for me was really about me discovering the history that I was never taught, not just the frontier wars, but just the political machinations that Indigenous Australians had gone through, and I had no idea about, before Mabo, the Bordernay change, the bark treaty in Arnhem Land, the Wave Hill walk-off, or the promise of Hawke to have treaty in '88. I was in the Northern Territory in '88. I had no idea that played out, and all these things that sort of played out, and I mean and all the grim stuff as well. But Bella Fraser, I mean, one thing I didn't want to do is be white mansplaining Indigenous politics, and as I said to Bella Fraser here, this book isn't written for Indigenous more, because they've lived viscerally that intergenerational trauma and suffering. They don't need me, as I said, to white mansplain what's going on. It's actually pitched at the other 97% of people that, like myself, didn't have a clue of what has happened until I had the privilege of being thrust into the role of writing Torres News. But for you, Bella, I mean, you've known me for a long time, and what do you think? You know where I'm coming from. What do you think is important from your perspective for us moving forward?
Look, it's Aaron, thanks for that. Look, I think it's it's complex in its sense. Like, I try and make sense of the world as well. I think when you think about the world is always shifting and moving, and every individual in Australia is pulled by their own priorities. I mean, and this is global, Stephanie. I think we're seeing a global shift in how humans are doing lives, especially in the Western world, and trying to deal with these issues around Indigenous, all the stuff that you talk about and the injustices, and just trying to make peace and getting people to come to a point. I think we have to, just sitting back and just watching the world, watching Australia, like we're polarized in a lot of ways, and we're seeing this all over the world. Because the world's shifting, people are pulled by their daily priorities as well. These things are pulling government as well, economic issues. There are other things that are always at the forefront that are pulling us. And I think those calculus have to come into play in how do we drive this message, because it's important, but also the other part is important as well, because it's affecting lives daily. It's affecting Emma's life down there, getting a job. There's other young people all over thinking about that, but how do we go about this? And I think when I look at the world in a polarized way where we are today globally, I think it really calls for us to rise above that. All sides to rise above that and to make a difference in our own way. And writing a book like this, Aaron, is a way of speaking into people and giving perspective. When I didn't read the whole book, but I was telling Aaron, it really opened my eye about when Aaron talked about, being a minority when he came up to Torres Strait. And I met Aaron, not long after he was there. And
First day in the job.
And I've always saw him as, because I'll go out and be, just welcome anybody, don't matter where they're from. And we talked, but I said to Aaron, I said, mate, I said, I've always seen you from a different lens. It was really interesting to see your insight about being a minority as a white fella in this part of the world. And it gave me a different insight about how, you felt about the world. And, I think, look, I don't know if I'm answering correctly, but I think, that's the current state of play is that it has to come in what the message you're trying to send has to be placed in the bigger context of all the other priorities that are pulling our country. And I think that's to be honest, because if we don't recognize that, we'll think that people just don't care. But that's the truth. Like there are people, families that are worrying about their daily survival, that are worrying about their stuff. And unfortunately, people are pulled through other priorities. Other noise are pulling people all over the world now because of technology. All sorts of frequencies are just penetrating the minds of young people, individuals, politicians. So
Fraser's being very well behaved right now. I'll just read you a passage from when the first time I met Fraser. It was my first day on the job. It was Mabo Day 2013. I turn and frame up an Islander man in my camera's viewfinder in his early 30s, a long time ago, brother. Tall and barrel-chested with shoulder length, manicured dreadlocks and trim beard. He gives me a salubrious smile, which I shoot. As soon as I do, his smile drops away and he looks at me sternly. In our culture, we believe a photograph steals our soul. After a pregnant pause, when I am no doubt looking utterly mortified at my crime, Fraser Nye, a counsellor from the outer island community of Massig, or York Island, puts me out of my misery. "Now, all good, Bella," which means brother. "Just kidding," he says, and the grin returns. It's my second lesson of the day. Nothing is straightforward in the Straits, and it seems there is also a good self-deprecating sense of humour in island ways. So that's just, and throughout the book, Fraser, and to this day, Fraser pulls the wool over my eyes, or the dreadlocks over my eyes, and but peppered between his larrikinism, we have some pretty deep and meaningful conversations, and we've had him on island aeroplanes flying over the Torres Strait. We've had him at functions and at coffee shops in Cairns. But one of the important things that you were talking about minority and the opportunity of becoming a minority in Australia, when I am the racial default of white male. It's the first time I've had it in other countries, but it was the first time I've had it in Australia where I was a minority. And it really did give me an opportunity to see Australia in a different lens as well. And I guess one of the big sort of meta narratives behind this book is that what I got from living in the Torres Strait was a sense of place and connection to place, and how important that is, and how coming from suburban Australia, how placeless and baseless most of us are. We don't really know what's beyond our quarter-acre block or our neighbourhood, and we don't truly connect with country. And that was one of the first things that I guess the home truths that I learned. And I think that's really important. In what I call the arse end of times, this decade that we're in right now, where we're sliding towards sort of a critical mass point. And I know Fraser's got his opinions on that from his perspective on how he sees the world, and even though we differ on viewpoints on religion, I agree in a lot of where we're heading. That I think as that connection to place, I think would go a long way to healing us as a planet and as a world. And I think that also that sense of community that living in the Torres Strait gave me, I think was a really important lesson as well. That I never had that. You don't get that in suburbia. When I first arrived in TI, I felt like I was stepping back into the 80s. When people look at you in the eye and say good morning, and I still talk about it now. When I miss, at sunset, I'm looking out for my daughter at low tide, and these croc and shark infested rivers, waters. I look down the beach and there'd be some auntie, and she'll just give me a sign language. She says, "Oh, you're picking image. They're with mine. They're down that way." I was like, "Oh, cool." Or sign language, and then I say, when the sun goes down, send her back. And he was like, "Yeah." And of course, sunset, my daughter's come back Some auntie at the beach was grouted to come home. And that sense of community is something was, you know, it was really hard to leave actually, you know, and where we live now in Cairns, first thing we did was knock on all the doors of the flats and say good day and introduce ourselves, and we bring food around, and they kind of looked at us a bit weird, but they talk to us now. That's something that, and that's not just TI, but it's a lot of those Indigenous communities that are throughout the Cape and the outer islands and the Western Province, that they make you feel that sense of community and that sense of letting you be belonging, I guess, is something that's really, it's a big take home for me.
You told a really good story in the book, Aaron, right at the very beginning about your prowess with the fishing rod and how the old Marys on the dock taught you how to fish, and yes. and how sorry they felt for you, and that people would drop fish in your bucket just to make you feel better. And there's this lovely passage where Aaron, I won't ruin it, but Aaron describes what happens when he caught his first real fish, and it's a real insight into how Aaron learnt about community and sharing in the community in a really simple act of fishing. It was, and it sort of sets, that's right at the beginning, it sets up the book really nicely.
I actually forgot about that story, and it was, they taught me how to cast a hand line, and the story was, you know, when you catch fish, you walk through the village and you give a fish to every door. Mm-hmm. And you know, if you've got a bucket of fish, you might end up with one. And and that's something that is very much, I mean, Frasers the same. He was just telling me just today in Cairns Central that there was some guy that his credit card wouldn't work, and his first impulse was to rush up and just swipe and go, I got this one bar, even though he didn't know the guy. You know, and Fraser's always been like that. He's always, I managed to pay for coffee today for the first time in years, I think. But you know, it's that island generosity that I think is it's hard to beat, and it certainly and I felt that, you know, they've got so much to give, even though they've lost so much in so many different levels. People in these communities, and it's like. It's like that. I came here with nothing. I still got most of it. Line I said earlier. It's like, you know, people with nothing will often be the most generous souls.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Aaron, like what you were saying before, like, you know, I think if there's a takeaway that what you're trying to say, we're talking about connection to country and connection to land and the importance of that. Like, we all live in different worlds, right? You know, our environment shapes our beliefs of the world. You know, shapes us. And we're dictated by that. And, you know, someone in inner city, Sydney, Melbourne, you know, they're going to be shaped by that world, you know, and nothing's wrong with that. That's just where they were born. Someone in Tibet is going to be shaped by someone in Alaska, different parts of someone in Torres. I guess the thing that to take away from what you were saying is empathy. If we can teach people to have empathy, that translates across the world. I don't have to live in Alaska to be understanding to people from there. If I teach myself to have empathy, if I, you know, learn that and build that value in me, learn how to have compassion, learn how to be, it teaches me to be understanding. It teaches me to have ears from the heart, not just a physical ear that hears sound. It makes me understand my vulnerabilities, and I can now empathize with others, their vulnerabilities, their fears. So I think that's the biggest thing that we need to teach people. It's not about shifting people here, moving people over there, and that we will always live where we're going to live, you know, and the decision. But if there's one thing we need to teach the world, it's that, because out of that comes understanding. Out of that, we can respond correctly.
I think, and just to illustrate that, I remember a story that Fraser told me about understanding how to read country, and how the old Ackers catch the mullet. And they would get the coconut, and they'd shave the coconut into like a paste, and then when the mullet are rising, coming into close to at sunset, they'd throw a handful of coconut about 20 meters out, and they'd get this feeding frenzy, and then another handful 15 meters out, there'd be another feeding frenzy, then 5 meters, then the last handful they'd throw on the beach, and the fish just jump out onto the beach. And I remember Fraser telling a bunch of island fishermen that, and I was just listening. And I went, that's bullshit. And that's one of Frasers' great stories. So it's like, and that's also, I think, something I learned about island ways is the sense of humour, you know, and for me, you know, Bella Fraser really, especially in the book, is the character Fraser in the book embodies that, you know, that there's nothing quite as wonderful as seeing a 120 kilo, 6'6" man squeal like a little girl at a joke, and that's what islanders laugh like. They do. You laugh with like a child. It's like it's you know, you hear islanders laugh. It's like, it's not a conceited laugh. It's a joyous thing. It's a beautiful thing. But I will. You go. Steph. Yes.
You've been talking about your relationship with the Torres Strait Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, because there's an Aboriginal community there as well. But what about your relationship with the government and the authorities up there? Because they are the other big population, really, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, as Uncle Napo Pedro Stephen said to me, he told me one time, it's like a zoo. It's I mean, it's got the rental prices on TI are worse than Sydney because you've got 37 government agencies there. But I had the opportunity to give them a hard time on many fronts. I guess the highlight of my career was my run-in with the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott. And when Tony Abbott was not allowed, didn't actually allow me to be part of the media junket, when community heard that, they snuck me on aeroplanes and on boats and on four-wheel drives, and I was everywhere the Prime Minister was before him. And it all actually came to a head at Kuki Mabo's grave, when the minder of Abbott said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Oh, you must be Abbott's minder." And he said, "How did you get here?" And I was like, "Mates, where are you staying, mates?" And it was just this beautiful moment where it was like a coup d'etat of bush journos. So I won't go into it too much because it's probably one of my favourite passages of the book. But yeah, look, it's been fun to be the thorn in the side of various politicians, I have to admit. And some of them, you know, I've made unusual bedfellows, like Warren Entsch. You know, we don't see on the same level politically, but I remember one time we were at a function with Warren Entsch, and someone at public service came up to him and said, "Oh, so what have you guys been doing?" He just turns to him and goes, "Oh, me and Aaron were at the Torres Hotel until lockdown, drinking martinis and dancing to Abbott." And the health worker just went, "What?" Right, yeah, we both just walked off and left it hanging. So, you know, it's, I don't know if that answers your question.
And Aaron, well, no, not really.
I haven't even been drinking.
No. I was more thinking of your relationship with, because it's a government town. TI is a government town. And it's very difficult for Torres Strait Islanders or Aboriginal people to live there because it's so expensive. So you have this mass of government agencies and all sorts of government bodies working up there, but it's quite dysfunctional. So how was your relationship with them, and why were they so scared of you?
Well, I guess, you know, I'd have my confidence that would walk through the door and give me documents of, you know, that would be embarrassing or damning, and you know, and I have to say that the Bosun family that owns the paper, they gave me all the rope I needed to hang myself, and they let me really go for it. And I guess it was just that I don't know if it was I had a reputation just to go for it and turn over every stone, as you said, but. Yeah, there was definitely. I know that one particular organisation had a communique that they weren't allowed to talk to me. I won't say which one, but that there was a proviso that no one was allowed to talk to me in case it became a story. And I mean, there was instances where I think Queensland Health, the dental fiasco, when they had people going 10 years without getting access to dental in the outer islands, but they spent $1 million on a dental drover, which is like a four-wheel drive, which was meant to be able to go to the outer islands, but they couldn't get it on the barge, so it just sat in the back lot until it was taken back down south. And I called that the $800,000 garden name, which which they didn't like. So I guess it was I don't know. If there's something you can think of in particular, you sort of put me on the spot a little bit.
Oh, well, that's my job. I'm a journalist.
Shit, journalists talking to journalists.
Yeah, well, because the Torres News is gone now. It's been amalgamated into another paper and it's still publishing in some form. What's because you did you're such a pain in the backside for the authorities up there, because you're really the only media outlet, and you're the only media outlet that had access to a national audience, because the subscriber list for the Torres News was extraordinary. The number of people who would read it in Canberra and read it in George Street in Brisbane. Not very few regional publications could claim a mailing list like that one. Do you have any fears about what can happen up there now that there's not really a journalist based up there telling the stories directly from the community?
I do, and I was speaking to Simon at the radio station up there just the other day. I mean, they're flat chat just trying to keep the radio station alive, and there is an absence of, and it's not just TI. There's regional journalism all across the country, and I was having a yarn on ABC about this today. It's not just the small stories, but it's the fact that you've got someone on ground that can actually understand those stories. That's not from the metropolitan a long way away, and that for me is really scary, because our job is to keep the buggers honest, well, accountable. You can't make them honest. But now that we're not there, it's like, it does worry me. And I still write stories occasionally when someone rings me down here, but it's different to being up there and being able to sort of, to be able to pursue things. And I think it is a worry, and that the Torres News, which was going for 63 years, is no longer. It was you had the Courier Mail, which was for all the mainland mob, and then you had the Torres News, which was for them. But I mean, how has it been for you as an island man now that the Torres News is no longer what it was?
Look, one thing I found, Aaron, like when the absence of it, like you just felt voiceless, because people still go to the paper, people still look at that. I mean, I felt that. That's how I felt. Like, you just felt voiceless. But I think the other side of that is the opportunity also to do it differently. I think through social media and through stuff like this, I think the opportunities are there to capitalize on, and how do we really penetrate into communities where younger generation can tell their stories and voice, through this. I think that's an opportunity where no one's really thinking about, or people probably are, but it's missing that opportunity that can really.
That's what I love about this bloke. He will turn any adversity into opportunity. And I think that's a really good point, is that there's a void there. There's definitely a void there, but newspapers are a dying medium anyway. And I think that, the problem with social media is it's not necessarily balanced journalism. But I think, I hope that the likes of Simon will fill that space eventually, or something else. I mean, there are some good island journos up there, but they're beholden to their government financing and so forth as well. So it makes it hard for them to be able to really turn against the hand that feeds them. So I think that. I don't know. I do worry about it. It's like, I continue to write as a journo part-time for The Guardian and other stories when they come, but there's just, and I work part-time in communications for a government department myself now, because I've got to put food on the table. And it is really concerning that, that this is something that's happening, not just up there, but in a lot of places. I mean, yourself, I do comms down here in Cairns, and I work with like the local TV stations, and I do packages. I work for an agency that looks after the wet tropics or heritage area, but I got to package things up for the news, because they haven't got the money to go out to the rainforest and cover a story. They can't get out of the CBD. They've got to file their stories by 2:30 for the evening news. And it's probably the same for you, Stefan. To get their 90-second story, they can't, they can't dry the air, like, of course. But you know, and it's, so there is, I think we're approaching a low tide in journalism. Hopefully things will turn. I don't know. What are your thoughts, mate? You've been in the industry a lot longer than me.
Well, the Torres News was really lucky because of the lack of infrastructure that was put into the region. There's been a huge communications lag in that area, and that allowed the Torres News to survive so much longer and be a viable entity. And there's probably still some element to that until the internet fully penetrates the region. But yeah, it's across the whole of regional Australia. The job cuts we've seen to regional journalism has been appalling. So there's now areas of Australia that don't have a regional newspaper at all. There's no regional coverage at all going on. And the really unfortunate thing about the Torres News not having a journalist on the ground there is this is our only international border. This is Australia's only interface with another country. In fact, it's two countries, because Indonesia is just there on the border with Papua New Guinea as well. And there's a lot going on there that we just don't hear about. Like even now, the cases of COVID-19 in Indonesia are out of control. It's our second nearest neighbour to Australia, and we don't hear anything about how much is going on there. And then in Western Province, there's so many things that go on over there as well. And then we don't hear anything about West Papua. And Aaron used to cover the West Papua issue as well, which very few Australian journalists touch at all. And you're giving local perspectives on it, and you're able to contact people in the area. So you're giving first-hand accounts. You're giving first-hand tellings of history effectively through the Torres News. And unfortunately, without that sort of reportage going on up there, it leaves a real vacuum. And I can imagine the government departments who were all reading the Torres News, hoping that they weren't going to be slammed again, but just checking to see what's going on up in the region. I bet you they're missing it too, because you're an independent source or the Torres News for the 63 years it was there. It was an independent source of information for them, where they weren't just getting yes people going, oh yeah, it's going really great up there with the dental van. They had someone actually saying, no, it's actually fully buggered up.
Yeah, I mean, the dental story was Phoebe Pilot from Arab. She came to me, you know, she almost died at sea twice in 6 weeks trying to bring her coming in from Arab, which is how many tins is that? So it's a 5-6 hour journey.
It's probably nearly 200 k's. 200
k's by dinghy, you know, and it was all good weather when they set out. Then it all, as it can do very quickly in the Torres Strait, the weather turned, as we saw in the news just recently from those boys in Warraba. And she almost died at sea twice. And she came to me and said, I was just trying to get the same dental cover as any other Australian, you know. And it's like those sorts of stories were, you know, that you would never hear, because, and that was my first sort of taste of blood, I guess. And it was like, and a taste that I grew to like, I have to admit. But and when I say that, you know, because that social justice, it became apparent to me, the power of that small paper, you know, of how that, like you said, that without Phoebe knocking on my door, because the office was there, she came in by dinghy, she walked down the beach, she knocked on my door and she told me the story. Yeah, and that became like a 6-month story, you know, and I got collared Scullion on it, I collared a couple of health ministers on it, and we finally got a result. There was a dental review. I think you were on the board at that point. And there was a dental review, and then they started flying, and then we got a result. So that was a great feeling. I guess the other big one was the stories that, which I'm still writing now, I guess, is about the 501 detention of First Nation people, or registered traditional owners on the National Title Register that have been locked up in detention centres and even deported in some cases, which was a really sort of strange set of stories that sort of unfold, and you know, and how that's played out with the High Court case earlier this year, where it was ruled that First Nation people cannot be considered aliens under the Constitution, and which wasn't just my work, but it was, you know, I was part of that as well, which is something that, you know, I'm really proud of. And before I left, actually, a Papuan fellow that drives taxis on TI just came to my door and gave me this beautiful carving, and he said, "That's thank you for the people of Papua, because we have even less voice," and it was those little moments, that really sort of really made it worthwhile. And sometimes people would bring me fish and banana damper bread and things like that just to say thank you. And that was the humbling, thing, that to realize that, just through my wordsmithing and a little tiny paper and the top end of nowhere, that I managed to help people from time to time. And that was a very gratifying feeling.
Okay, I'll ask a question to Fraser. Fraser, you've read part of the book. Can you give us a little bit of a review as an Islander, reading what Aaron's written? And I'm very conscious of this as well as a white fella who reports on the Pacific and the many different stories from the Pacific from many different people with different languages and different cultures. But I'm a medium for telling story. How did Aaron do?
Look, I've only read probably like the first 50 pages. But I must say, like I was saying to Aaron, I said, his opening 4-letter word, that was, I thought, I love Aaron's creativity and how to grab people's attention. But just going through it, I can feel I said to Aaron, I said, bro, I really feel where you're coming from, what you're trying to translate, what you're trying to communicate to the rest of Australia. And you're doing it in a way that is non-confronting. It's from a lived perspective, as just someone who's, an Australian from Tassie, who's gone the other part of the Strait, from Bass Strait to Torres Strait, and you now become a minority, and you're seeing it through that lens. And it is showing the world to the other parts of Australia, and I'm not blaming anyone, I'm just saying it's just showing people a perspective that comes from a place of empathy. And this is what I got out of it. Aaron's putting it across, I said, bro, I think that's really well. I was just glued to it. I just wanted to read it. And, I was just stuck to it this morning, just reading it, thinking about Aaron's perspective and thinking about, what the world looks like when you're a minority, just from that perspective. And I think, wow, a lot of people don't know this. I mean, we talk about stuff, but we don't try and empathize. That's something I'm big on, empathy. And, it's, Aaron and I have conversations a lot. And I think, I've said to him, it's like, I'm not one to cry victim. I'm not one to cry all that part. I'm free to do whatever I want, and I'm going to do whatever I want to do in life. I was blessed. I was taught that, and that's my thinking. That, and I live out of how I see the world from that point. But I see where Aaron's coming from and trying to get people to think from that perspective. And, and I said to Aaron, just listening what Aaron was saying before about him and Warren Ench, having a drink at the pub, different political viewpoint, but I can go and still have a drink and be mates. I'm thinking that's the maturity that we all personally, individually need to grow up to. We have points of view, like Aaron and I share different points, different views on things, but here we are, two bros. That's the maturity that every one of us need to come, that we need to go in a polarized world more so than ever, that it's about not saying nice fluffy words in this. It's about real human being developed to be mature humans, that we can have a point of difference that we don't agree on, but mate, we can still go and have a beer. We can still go and have a bite somewhere. That's the level where we need to go. We need to go to Stefan. And I think that's what Aaron's really putting through in a way that's, coming from, it's not confronting to people. It's not like I was saying to Aaron, there's a proverb an old proverb I heard that says, the same sun that melts butter also hardens clay.
I love that.
And it's about how you deliver truth. And that's personally in our own lives, in our relationship with our partners, our kids, our friends, our colleagues, and to a national perspective. How we deliver truth is so important. It can be truth, but delivering truth in the wrong way can harden clay. Understanding when the right context to deliver it in whichever way, you can melt the hardest of butter for that matter, And I found from a lived experience in my life, most people I've come around with, I've melted their hearts. because I've always moved out of a place of empathy where I'm trying to understand them, I'm trying to help them, trying to love them, trying to improve. I don't care who they are. I'll meet a stranger down the road today and I'll be like that because it's coming from a place that's in my core. And I think Aaron's looking at that, is trying to put it to Australia. I mean, it starts off really confronting in the start, but as you go through it, I'm like, wow. I mean, I didn't know about some of the stuff as well, but I can see Aaron's art in it from a lived point about his own awakenings and his own enlightenment, working, doing journal and finding out these things and going, yeah. And it's in a way that is not confronting, in like, you're wrong, you're guilty, you're that, but it's in a way that is, this is what I found out for me. And, you know, if people can see that and go, wow, if we can all see that and go, well, how do we move on from this part and make our future better for our kids and stuff like that? Anyway, Stefan, I hope I'm doing justice to your question.
Oh, no, it's about Aaron, not about me.
No, I mean, but your question, so.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I'm sort of just taking over now.
No, go, man.
Aaron and I go back a long way. We've done quite a few little stories here. Aaron, I'm just curious about how you wrote the book, because you're up there for 7 years, and you covered a lot more in the Torres news than you could possibly squeeze into that book. And I was reading it, and there's stories I was looking, oh, okay, that one didn't make it, that one did make it. How did you choose? Were you just being a tabloid journalist and picking the most sensational stuff, or what were you doing?
Yeah, a bit of that. But I mean, I didn't sleep much, and I got a very patient wife that puts up with me this sort of, working all day, and then, you know, when everyone's gone to bed, I'd nip back into the office and smash out a few more hours. I guess that I started writing a blog before I knew I was going to write about, called Going Straight, which is sort of my coming of age, because I mean, the Torres News was my first actual proper job. I sort of blagged my way through most of my life and blagged my way into this job, and that was just like a stream of consciousness and that's how I've written my other two books. It's streams of consciousness to capture the moment, the visceral, the here, the now, the smells, the sights, the sounds, because yes, thank you, brother. I gave you that book after a whiskey-drenched night at the Clarion Awards in 2014. I don't really remember much of that night, but and that blog became just capturing the essence of my experience in the Straits, because that's when you leave somewhere, that's the first thing that goes, and it's the first thing that comes back when you go back and you're hit by the smell of country, of that place. All the facts and stuff you can fill in later. And I had 330 newspapers that I could draw upon to get those stories out of. So for me, my writing process was just that stream of consciousness. And then once it all came into place a couple of years in, again, Uncle Pedro with the story about the rock and the allegory for Alcatraz, and he told me that story. And then that's when it sort of clicked, and I saw the rock as the third rock from the sun, and TI as an allegory for the whole planet, as a little tiny slice of humanity of all its trials and tribulations. And that's, I guess, I had sort of piles of notes and sort of blog posts and notes from history books. And then when coming back on that dinghy ride with Uncle Pedro, and he told me that story, I was like, that was my eureka moment. It was like, right, okay, that's the title came, and I knew that it was going to be called The Rock, and I wanted it to be a little slice of the whole world on that little 3.5K island, and for me, it was an opportunity to that was my bigger picture that I wanted to sort of express behind the story. And then it was just filling in the gaps and which stories to leave out. And in fact, I was calling my long-suffering publisher until the day before going to print saying, look, I know I promised the last 3 times I won't add anything else, but can you just add this last little detail because of the stuff that was happening with the High Court and people being released from jail or detention centres. And in fact, one of my last day on the job, speaking of Warren H, I almost died on my last day. I thought I was never going to leave the Torres Strait. It was at Uncle George Myers' tombstone, an Arab. and we were flying back, and Warren H flew me out there. But it was my last day in the Torres Strait as a journo. And we're flying back in the island, and we're falling asleep in the plane. And then, the plane's flying out the sky. I just turned around to Ench. I don't know who said it. It's like, fucking Jesus. I think Ench said. Then the plane started again. But I had the text message on my phone to my wife saying, "I love you, babe." You know, just in case we didn't make it back. So there was a moment I thought, shit, I'm never going to leave the Torres Strait. The book was actually written and the deal was done. So the book would have come out. This would have been close hymns. But yeah, look, it's been a wonderful journey. I guess, you know, just talking about some of the stories that didn't make it, it's one of the ones that I enjoyed working on with you, Stefan, was when Scott Morrison came up as the immigration minister 2 weeks before he announced the formation of the border force. He came up with journalist Peter Michael from the Cairns Post, and Peter Michael wrote a story of how high-speed speedboats coming from Papua New Guinea, where gangs of East Africans were in cahoots with bikers to do this massive smuggling routine. And I gave you a call. I said, yeah, and then you got on the phone to the PNG Constabulary. You happened to have the Crime and Corruption Commission report in your hand, and you flicked through that. And I got on the phone to the police inspector, and they hadn't heard anything about this multinational, international thing. So my next headline was "Bikers on Boats, New Threat to Torres Strait," which is just pretty fun. And I think Mayor Fred Gerlin said at the time, I think Scott Morrison's been watching too many episodes of The Straits. But obviously that was just a beat up, because 2 weeks later he announced his border force, and the three tactical high-speed speedboats that were going to be brought up, which are still dry docked on Horn Island and never been used. But that was one of my fun. I remember us both having a lot of fun with that. There was a lot of laughing down the phone. What the hell is this dick playing at? But so we have had our fun over the years, mate. It's been a pleasure, and there's a big part of you in this book, you know. And
thank you.
And I would have never have got down to that whiskey-drenched night in 2014 unless you suggested I submit those dental stories in for the Clarions. And I remember saying, I don't have a suit, and he was a bit worried because he was emceeing the Queensland Clarions, and I thought, you were like, I'll need you a suit. It's like, nah, man, I'm just going to come down in my thongs and t-shirt.
And you fitted right in, because it was the first year that the guys from the Batuta Advocate came, and they came in a cowboy hat as well. So
yeah, it was it.
Emma, I think Emma's got some questions, Aaron.
Yeah, we've had a few questions come through, but unfortunately we've only got a little bit of time left. So I'm going to ask one of them, and what I'm going to do with the rest is thank you all so much for sending them through and for listening in. We've got really good engagement in this talk. I'll send them through to you, Aaron, after the event, because we're not going to get to cover all of them, but I'm going to ask this one, which I think is a nice way for us to conclude, which is from Eve. And Eve says, Aaron's hat is in many photos. In each one, it looks a little bit more battered, a little bit more worn through lived experience. How old is that hat, and what's its story? What are all the bits and pieces on it?
I don't think we've got enough time to talk about that. It was a hat that I got in the high plains of Argentina, and it's got various blinks. It's got cassowary feathers given to me by Uncle Jeff Wire. It's got a bullet from the 100th anniversary of Anzac Day. It's got various other things. There is a funny story with the hat. It was when Tony Abbott came up, and I wrote this damning piece about how he stiffed the local business 50 grand in hotel bills. And I've been chasing Abbott around, as I told you. And I blagged my way into this business convention, and Tony Abbott came in, and there was 20 tables, and he walked up, and of all the people he could have sat down next to, he sat down next to me, and he shook hands with all these Islander fishermen. And he looked at the hat, and he looked at me and he goes, "Oh, you're that journalist." But, you know, that embarrassed his whole thing. He then proceeded to ask a bunch of Islander fishermen, going, "So, are there any crayfish in the Torres Strait?" And these fishermen were like, "What? Is that, does anybody fish the crayfish?" Crayfish is the biggest, most viable industry in the Straits, and at which point his minder, who had to run it at Marbo's grave, said, "This is off the record." And I said, "Mate, it's all good. It's off the record from here on in." That all went to print, and that story was called for all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't keep Torres news away again, which was discussed in the Senate's Estimates Committee. So it's a bit about the hat, but the hat's another story. And in fact, you can read about the hat in the other book that Stefan held up, Chasing El Dorado. So yeah, that one there. Thank you. Nice segue.
Great, thank you. I might fit one more in that case. Ryan's asked, he said, Aaron, thanks for your book. I'm very interested in the way that you learned to see yourself as a minority within Torres Strait and had to acquire a connection to place. In some ways, all white migrant Australians are also newcomers, and in many places they may be minorities within communities. Should journalists change the way that they report stories in Australia so that they can also practice being a newcomer?
Wow, that's a really good question. We did talk about that today, didn't we? And it's and I won't announce something that a idea that Fraser has shared with me, but something that we're brewing up right now that addresses that. And I will say that looking at something as a minority definitely gives you fresh eyes, and I think it was refreshing for me, and it allowed me to see things I would never have seen otherwise. And I think that the majority of Australians are made up by minorities, and to be able to give all those minorities a voice, I think will increase the beautiful mosaic that this country is and should be and desperately needs to be. And so the short answer is yes.
Great, thank you. Well, because it is now 7:30 where we are in Queensland, we have unfortunately run out of time. Look, thank you so much. This has been a really, really great conversation. As I said, we've had more comments and questions coming through, so I'll pass those on to you all after the event. Thank you all so much for attending. I have posted the link that you can use to purchase your copies of The Rock if you haven't grabbed it already from us at Avid Reader. I'll now hand back to Stefan for some final comments before we wrap up for the evening.
Oh, thanks, Emma. I wasn't planning on doing final comments, but I just want to acknowledge Colin Cowell, who's been here on this Zoom call. Colin's a former editor of the Torres News.
Yes,
on my screen, he's just down here, and the Torres News has got this a very proud tradition of holding their governments to account, and so Colin's another one of those who's been part of that family and part of that journey. So you've got two great Islander journalists who have just been,
You've got my dates, Colin. Give me a call when you're in Cairns. We'll catch up and have a brew.
Yeah, Colin actually wrote a comment here saying, as a former manager editor of the Torres News in 1989, this fantastic discussion has brought back many memories. So I'll pass that one along with the rest.
Beautiful,
yeah,
thank you.
Aaron, Fraser, Stefan, thank you so much. I hope that you've all enjoyed tonight's conversation, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of the evening.
Thank you very much.
Likewise, Emma Kate.
Thanks, everybody.
Eso,
Have a lovely night.